What's up, everybody? It's JT Sports back to you guys with another video. In this video, I'm here with the Oakland Raiders 2019 wide receiver preview. Going to be previewing and giving analysis and breaking down all of the wide receivers that the Oakland Raiders currently have on their roster so far. So before I begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. A little NFL videos, NFL content daily. I also have weekly live streams every Sunday afternoon at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. A live call-in show when people come in, call in, and we just talk about the NFL and things that's going around the league. So make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're a fan of stuff like that. And also make sure if you have a team that you guys want me to preview, make sure to comment it and also comment the position for it as well for that team. So the Oakland Raiders wide receivers. This wide receiving group is very impressive. I think this wide receiving group is on the outside looking in as a top 10 wide receiver group. This wide receiving group is very improved. After the Oakland Raiders got rid of Amari Cooper, they basically had nobody. That revamped their whole entire receiving core. They got Derek Carr weapons now, and Derek Carr, this guy has a big season ahead of him, and he has to produce. And I think he's going to end up producing. I think he's going to have a very good season because now he has weapons around him, has a very good receiving core, and it just makes me a little bit upset the way that Derek Carr's career has went. This guy was an MVP candidate just a few seasons ago, and then he just kind of fell off. And a big reason for that was because the wide receiving position last year wasn't really that good after they got rid of Amari Cooper. So now you got Derek Carson weapons to throw to now. I think he's going to be in for a very big season. This whole entire receiving core as well for the Oakland Raiders is going to be very productive this year. Very high on them. So first guy that we have is Antonio Brown. In 2018, Antonio Brown had 1,297 receiving yards, 104 receptions, and 15 touchdowns. Thought he was an all-pro, but he didn't make it. I think Antonio Brown is the best receiver in all of football. That anybody can debate. You can say DeAndre Hopkins, you can say Julio Jones, and you can make good arguments for all of those guys, but I just have my opinion, and I think Antonio Brown is the best wide receiver in football. When you look at what this guy has done over the past couple of seasons, this guy's production is off the charts. One thing about Antonio Brown that never gets really talked about is how consistent he is. This guy is very consistent week in and week out. You can depend on this guy to make plays and to show up. He also works very hard, and he's going to give Derek Carr a very good number one receiver that he really hasn't had. Amari Cooper was okay for a couple of seasons, but Antonio Brown is better than Amari Cooper, and we're going to see that this year. I think him and Derek Carr are going to have a pretty good season this year, and I think Antonio Brown, he's going to keep up the production. Although he's up there a little bit in age, still think he's going to have a pretty productive year. I think he makes the Pro Bowl this year, and he's going to have a pretty good season as well. Next up, we have Ryan Grant. Ryan Grant was signed by the Oakland Raiders this year in free agency. Last season, he played for the Indianapolis Colts, had 334 receiving yards, 35 receptions, and 1 touchdown. So Ryan Grant, it's going to be interesting to figure out how the Oakland Raiders get him into the fold of this wide receiving core. A lot of talent on here. He's going to make the roster. I'm not saying that. It's just going to be interesting to figure out how he gets involved in this Oakland Raiders passing attack. I think Ryan Grant's a guy who's going to have 500 to 600 receiving yards, probably have 40 receptions, somewhere in that 40 range, and he'll probably have 2 or 3 touchdowns this year. So that's my expectations for Ryan Grant this year on the Oakland Raiders in 2019. Next up, we have Keelan Doss. Keelan Doss is a guy that I'm really, really excited about. I'm really, really high on him. He was an undrafted free agent out of UC Davis. He has solid size. He's 6'2", 211 pounds, runs good routes, has good hands, but his biggest struggle is getting off press coverage, which is something that should be able to improve with repetition and coaching. And Keelan Doss, I think he's going to end up making this roster because this was a guy who was supposed to be drafted or was expected to be drafted And the later rounds of the NFL draft, round 5 to 6, some people had him projected to go in the 4th round. So the fact that this guy went completely undrafted, I think the Oakland Raiders got a big steal and they got a diamond in the rough player with Keelan Doss. And I think he's a guy who can end up making this roster. And I think he can have an impact with the Oakland Raiders this season because just what he brings to the table, if he's able to improve his release and working on getting off press coverage, because this guy is very athletic, very explosive, runs good routes, good hands. I like a lot of things about Keelan Doss, and I'm really high on Keelan Doss. He's a guy who I'm gonna be keeping my tabs and keeping my eyes on as we go forward through the off season into training camp and the NFL preseason. Next up, we have Keon Hatcher. Keon Hatcher was an undrafted free agent in 2017 out of Arkansas University. He was on the Oakland Raiders practice squad for the 2017 NFL season. And then in 2018, during September, he ended up getting waived and spent time on the Detroit Lions and Green Bay Packers practice squad before being brought back to Oakland in November last season. Now, Keon Hatcher, I don't really know if he's going to make the roster this year because they have a lot of talent at that wide receiver position now. Last season they were a little bit depleted at that wide receiver position, so they ended up bringing them back. But this season, I think I'm gonna have a hard time saying that he's going to end up making a roster. Um, I don't like making roster predictions, but if I had to, I say that Keon Hatcher ends up not making a roster just because it's not that I don't think he's talented or anything. I just don't think that he will be able to make the roster because of how good this wide receiving core for the Oakland Raiders is this season. So I'm gonna have a hard time seeing him making the roster, especially if they only bring in about 6 receivers this season, which I think they will. They'll probably bring about 6. I just don't see Keon Hatcher being one of those guys to make the roster of those 6 receivers out of 53. So if he ends up making the roster, it'll probably be because of his ability to contribute on special teams. But I just don't see Keon Hatcher making the roster considering how stacked they are at the receiver position. Since it's only 53 guys who you can have on the roster, they're probably only going to take about 6 receivers. I think they're at least going to take 6 receivers. So I just don't see Keon Hatcher making the Oakland Raiders roster this season. Next up, we have Monte Crockett. Monte Crockett was an undrafted free agent out of Georgia Southern in 2017 by the Green Bay Packers and ended up getting released by them and spent time with Jacksonville Jaguars before getting released in January 2018. Then got waived by the Houston Texans and was signed by the Jacksonville Jaguars again in June 2018 and was released in September before the 53-man cuts when they were trimming down the roster from 90 players to 53 players. And then he ended up spending time during the 2018 season on the Arizona Cardinals and Washington Redskins practice squad before getting signed by the Oakland Raiders. He's another guy who I think won't make the roster. He might make the practice squad, but like I said, I don't see him making the roster as well. I just think though this Oakland Raiders wide receiving core is a little bit too stacked for guys like him to make the roster. I could see him being the guy who ends up getting brought in on the practice squad. Then if somebody goes down, he can end up being moved to the active 53-man roster. But I just think he's one of those guys who's going to be the odd man out. Not because I just don't think they're talented. I just think this wide receiving core for the Oakland Raiders is just too stacked this season. I think he's going to end up being put on the practice squad or just getting released. Next up, we have Tyrell Williams. In 2018, Tyrell Williams was very solid for the LA Chargers, had 653 receiving yards, 41 receptions, and 5 touchdowns. And he was a very good number 2 option on the other side of Keenan Allen. And he's going to complement Antonio Brown really well. And I think he's going to get a lot more targets than what he got with the LA Chargers and in that offense and that passing attack with Antonio Brown getting most of the attention, getting double teamed and whatnot. Tyrell Williams is going to have an opportunity to have a big season. I think he's going to have a career year this season. I think he'll have his highest career stats in receiving yards and receptions. And I think he's going to end up having a breakout season. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Tyrell Williams in 2019 have a Tyler Boyd like season. Next up, we have Marcel Aitman. Marcel Aitman was drafted by the Oakland Raiders in 2018 out of Oklahoma State and was on the Oakland Raiders practice squad before getting moved up to the main roster in October. He has good size and good hands and also makes good adjustments while catching the ball. I think he will make the roster this year. and he's a very good threat in the red zone just because of his size and his ability to catch jump balls. And I think Marcel Aitman, he's a guy who I'm not really concerned about making the roster. I just think if he goes out and does pretty solid in training camp and preseason, he will most definitely be on the Oakland Raiders roster. Next up, we have Saeed Blacknall. Now, Saeed was an undrafted free agent by the Oakland Raiders in 2018 and spent last season on their practice squad. Couldn't really find a lot of information about him, so he's another guy who probably most likely will be on the practice squad again this year, maybe, or just not making the roster because it's very talented. So if I'm doing research and I'm trying to figure out, trying to find information, if you did good in OTAs and minicamp, then it's going to be a lot of articles talking about you, how you're a sleeper and stuff like that. But when it's kind of scarce and you're not able to find a lot of information on these players, then that just means that they need to do more to make the roster. And Saeed Blacknall, I think he has some potential, but I'll be really surprised if he ends up making the roster for the Oakland Raiders. Next up, we have Dwayne Harris. Dwayne Harris had 40 receiving yards, 6 receptions, and no touchdowns in 2018, but he's not really a guy who contributes much on the offense side of the ball. He's a guy who's a returner, is going to give you those big punt returns and kick returns on the special team side of the ball, and pretty much his spot is already secured. Next up, we have Hunter Renfro. This guy, it seems like he's been in Clemson for about 3 decades, 3 centuries, but he's finally in the NFL now. I think Hunter Renfro is going to have a very solid rookie year for the Oakland Raiders. And I think overall in his career, I think he's a guy who's going to be a better version of Cole Beasley. He's not going to be the guy who's going to lead the league in receptions, receiving yards, and stuff like that. But he's going to be a reliable target for Derek Carr to throw to on third downs when he needs somebody to move the possession or move the chains. And I think Hunter Renfro is going to end up being that guy for the Oakland Raiders. That was a really solid pick when they ended up picking Hunter Renfro in the 5th round of this year's draft. The last guy that we have is JJ Nelson. JJ Nelson's stats took a big hit last season. This guy, the previous season, had 500 yards the previous 2 seasons. And then 2018, I just don't know what happened. 64 receiving yards, 7 receptions. Hopefully, with a better quarterback and Derek Carr, he's able to get back on the right foot. I think he ends up resurrecting himself, and I think he'll probably end up having about 400, 500 receiving yards, and he'll probably have about 30, 40 receptions this year, and I like him to score at least 3 touchdowns this season. I think J.J. Nelson has a bounce back year for the Oakland Raiders in 2019. So this is it for this video. Let me know some more teams that you guys want me to do down in the comment section down below. Also, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more NFL videos and content. And thanks for watching.